And the next area I want to discuss is for integrated research projects, which we're very excited about. This will allow for up to $3 million in funding over 3 years. And this is to address a gap that industry has identified. And that is to minimize the graphite core component waste. So within high temperature gas reactors, graphite could be used extensively for different components within the core. And eventually we have to think of the end of life of the cycle and really what are we going to do with this graphite. So proposals could include areas of interest such as what has been done in the past, what are the regulations, what are the gaps in regulations, as they may not be focused on current advanced reactors. They were originally set for light water reactors. So how do we address these regulatory gaps possibly so that we can put together an infrastructure for allowing waste disposal and waste minimization of graphite core components. And also another area of interest could be what are the challenges if graphite is exposed to molten salt. So again, please read the full details in the funding opportunity announcement as it's made available. For this IRP, I will act as the federal point of contact, and the technical point of contact will be Will Wines again, since he is our expert in graphite qualification. So with that, I think we could take any questions.
Okay, Diana, thank you. We do have a few questions. The first question is, could you elaborate on some of the perceived potential barriers regarding Trisol fuel to commercial deployment?
Sorry about that. So we have been working on Trisol qualification for a while now, over a decade. Some of the issues I think have been closed and others are being addressed. So for example, when we were first working on Trisol fuel qualification, we wanted to show that it could be made in a very repeatable, scientific, methodical manner, and that I believe we have closed that gap. Other areas are really dependent on the design. There are different ways that Trisol will be used in compact form or pebble form, and then that is really up to the developer to address gaps with the regulator. Really, I think right now we're just compiling the remaining data available, and it just depends on how different your fuel would be from what we have made in the Trisol program. I recommend looking at a recent topical report that NRC has approved that included AGR1 and AGR2 data, and you can see from there that there are certain specifications, and if you are within these specifications, we have very strong confidence that Trisol fuel will perform within a certain range that has very robust fuel performance characteristics. But without further detail, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but we are always available to meet to further give you more details.
Okay, the next question. Could you elaborate on some of the perceived, oh, I'm sorry, that is the one we just asked. Is modeling using molecular dynamics part of the scope?
I think we would need more details. We are looking for modeling to really help us identify what are the best techniques for testing pebbles for the first NEOP scope. If we're talking about the second scope, the IRP, really just give us the details in your proposal, because modeling has been useful for really accelerating different and closing certain gaps without taking as long. But yeah, it's up to the details that you provide in the proposal.
Okay. The next question is, would NDE testing plans for pebbles be considered relevant to the RC4 call?
With that detail, I would say yes. I want to maybe defer to Will if he's on the line to give some.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, let's face it, that'd be fantastic if we could go in and have a non-destructive technique or method that would allow us to see if there was some kind of a large void structure or a large crack or any type of irregularities within the pebbles that would compromise the structural integrity. I think the emphasis should be on the structural integrity. One of the things that we want to understand is the mechanical strength of these various pebbles and how are they going to withstand, or are they going to be able to withstand the mechanical loads that are placed upon them within the pebbles. So yeah, an NDE technique would be very interesting, especially if it was co-joined with some kind of a mechanical testing capability or methodology that went in and said, if you see this kind of defect, you can see this kind of reduction in strength.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are there any guidance documents, such as a waste acceptance criteria for preparing spent triso fuel for disposal?
I am not the expert, but I want to say yes. There have been previous efforts into looking at triso fuel disposal, but they might have been very conservative to make it simpler at the time when there were small amounts of triso fuel. So really, we're going to leave that up to you to do some digging. You can talk to Will for maybe a little bit more, for him to point you in the right direction. But there has been work done before on triso fuel disposal. It's just, of course, we're focused on graphite components right now too.
Right.
Yeah, so that's not our main focus for this IRP.
Yeah, I wanted to re-emphasize that because Diana is exactly correct. We debated, we literally debated before we put this call out whether we should include the actual fuel kernels themselves, and we've decided that for this stage at least, we wanted to address the volumetric, the bulk volumetric problems that the large structural graphite comprises within these cores. The fuel is probably a step further in that regard, but you're going to have enough problems and issues to deal with for the unfueled structural graphite. So that will be, something that you're going to want to make note of. You're not going to really be talking about the fuel kernels themselves, but actually the structural graphite.
Okay, next question. Is there possible funding for developing experimental and/or computational studies for safety studies of gas-cooled reactors? And this is focusing on thermal hydraulics.
I would say this year's focus is not in that area. We have had funding opportunities in the past, and there could be funding opportunities in the future. But this year, we are very much focused on the pebbles and graphite. There may be some other calls within computational methods that might allow this area, though not specific to high temperature gas reactors.
Next question. Is experimental work the focus for RC4? Is it a must?
I'm not going to say it's a must. Obviously, there are definitely some benefits of having experimental work, but give us your detailed proposal on what you believe can be accomplished in that time frame and what you believe is necessary. And again, Will, I'll defer to you too on your input.
No, I think you put your finger on it. I don't want to quash anybody's creative process any more than you do. So that's a great response. We'll evaluate that along with the other proposals. So yeah, Dan, you're spot on.
Next question. For IRP-RC-2, are only proposals that include the graphite waste issues of interest, Or are topics that are focused on the Trisol uranium reprocessing also of interest?
I think Will had addressed this a little bit earlier. We are very much focused on the graphite components right now. Trisol fuel and disposing of that is also a challenge, but we just want to focus on one area for now with the graphite components.
Okay, next question. So RC2 will not cover the issue associated with large graphite quantities being unacceptable to a repository for spent nuclear fuel. Is this correct?
I'm going to defer that to Will because my first knee-jerk reaction is that's not correct.
Correct. I almost bounced it back to you. Yeah, the way it's worded, it sounds like they're saying that the large volumetric graphite is not going to be acceptable in current regulatory practices, which is correct, because I don't know if there is any regulatory practices for the graphitic structural, radiated graphitic structural material. And that's one of the issues we want to address in this. I do want, and so the answer is yes and no. I mean, they're correct. We don't have any regulatory that we know of rules and code that will handle this kind of new waste form. And so as a consequence, we want to go in and explore that and see what gaps are there, if any, and then how can we go in and address those gaps. I do want to say one thing, and that is that for anybody who is interested in this, probably the two historical sources that should be uppermost in your notes is the work that was done in the graphite program back in the 1990s in the nuclear spent fuel program that the DOE had, both at Idaho and nationally. There was a lot of work in trying to figure out what to do with the Fort St. Vrain graphite that was being decommissioned at that point or shut down. So there was a fair number of reports that came out of both Idaho, Oak Ridge, and other places that addressed the very issues that we're talking about. Now, they weren't resolved, but there was a lot of good work that was done. And then the second thing that's probably as, if not more important, is the work that's being done in the UK and in Europe in general. Specifically to address the Magnox reactors and the large graphite volume that they are trying to reduce in volume and trying to understand how they can take the final waste form and process it. So those are two sources that if you're going to have a successful proposal, I'm going to strongly encourage you to have looked into those sources of information because they will have a lot of good information and a lot of good ideas. So, and those are the kinds of things that we want to address in this. We are a little bit behind in this area, and we want people to start looking into it. And but specifically what we want to do is have them look at the USA issue specifically. What may be a potential solution in the UK may not work in the United States. And that's why there was that emphasis that Diana had on what are the regulations and the rules, and then where are the gaps and what do we need to address. So I wanted to make that very clear to anybody who's interested in pursuing this.
Thank you, Will. The next question, would IRP-RC-2 include defueled graphite block disposal?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, that's essentially what we're looking for.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. For RC4, Is it focused more on the Trisome particle, including layers of both graphite and SiC, or the graphite material?
I will defer to Will for that.
Graphite materials. The Trisome particles are not in this scope at this point. There's a lot of questions about that, but basically it's the graphite structural material.
Okay, Diana, if we could go back to RC2 for just a minute on the microreactors, we have a question about that one. Would a new microreactor design satisfy all the requirements to be reviewed and possibly funded under that work scope?
So we are again open to ideas. There are many microreactor designs proposed and in development. So we would just have to see the input. I mean, this is that is for an $800,000 project. So I mean, what can you do for that amount of money in 3 years? So just give us your details and we can look at it. So I'm not going to say yes or no right now.
A question that is going to come up over the course of the webinar today, tomorrow, and Thursday that we'll address on occasion here for new participants. There's always questions about how many projects are going to be funded in a specific area and those types of things. Please be aware that DOE budgets are not finalized, so there's no clear answer that can be given by program managers. The intention of the department is to fund at a minimum one project out of each final work scope that comes out for the funding opportunity under perfect budget conditions. So we won't be addressing those questions as they come through over the course of the day, but just know that that's the general answer, is that there's no way to predict those at this time.
Okay, thank you. We have no more questions.